Augmenting path is always with respect to a given matching. So if you have an augmenting path, you keep on improving by flipping or doing that XOR operation, and keep on doing this as long as you do not have any more augmenting paths. So what do you do when somebody gives you a graph with no matching? What are the augmenting paths in that? So remember our favorite graph, whatever was there. So let's say that you have to sometimes start at this graph, right? Maybe this was our graph. I don't remember the exact thing, but maybe this was our graph. And let's say that you start, somebody gave you this without any matched edges. Then what are there augmenting paths here? How many augmenting paths are there? Yeah, tell me one augmenting path. Maybe let me name this V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, V6, V7. Certainly this is not the graph that we drew. Okay, so tell me any augmenting path. V1, V2. In fact, every edge itself is an augmenting path because it is a edge which is a simple path in the graph, which is not having which is having both its endpoints which are free, because all vertices are marked as free to begin with. As soon as you make that V1, V2 is an augmenting path and augment along it, now yes, you have restricted the augmenting paths which are going to be either, say, V6, go back to V6 of course. So that we have to find out how to find these augmenting paths, right? But clearly a given, if you have a graph without any matching, every edge in that graph qualifies to be an or is a valid augmenting path, right? So the first iteration is very clear, whatever be the given graph. The first iteration, there are augmenting paths as long as there are edges in the graph, and any edge can be returned. Good. So now we are in this process of designing this black box that is given a graph and a matching in a graph. So a matching is just a set of edges. Somebody gave you that these are the edges which are matched. Now tell me whether there is an augmenting path, or tell me that, and if it has one augmenting path, give me that path, which is a sequence of vertices in the graph such that it forms a simple path. So here is where we are going to say that we will only answer this question in the bipartite setting. So if we certainly can answer this question in the general setting where graphs are not necessarily bipartite, but it requires a little more machinery and more theory which cannot be developed in today's class, but nevertheless it is doable in efficient time, which is polynomial time. So let us ask first this simple question: is this given graph bipartite? Okay, have you seen what are bipartite? Have you heard this term? What is a bipartite graph? No. Okay, so can we have show of hands? How many have you not heard the term bipartite? Okay. Okay, so there are very few who have heard the term. So is this graph bipartite? I will come back to it. Is this graph bipartite for people who have heard? Yes. Okay. But so let me now define what are bipartite graphs. So bipartite graphs are graphs which have this peculiar property that the vertex set can be divided into two parts, just like I have shown here. There are these blue vertices and there are these pink vertices. So there are two parts to the vertex. You can divide the vertices into two parts such that every edge is going from one partition to the other. So between the blue vertices, there are going to be never going to be any edges. Between the pink vertices themselves, there are never going to be edges. If at all there are edges, they are always going to be across these partitions. That is, they start at a blue vertex, end at a pink vertex. And this is, therefore it is called bipartite, that is, there are two parts to the vertex set. So bipartite graphs appear in several cases, right, where you say that jobs are there on one side, machines are there. So you cannot run a job on a job or a machine on a machine, but you will always have this relation whether job J can be executed on machine M, and so on. So therefore, whenever you have relationships between two disjoint sets of objects, you naturally come up with bipartite graphs. And it happens so that these student project allocations or course faculty allocations are indeed relations which have this bipartite nature. That is, one side of the partition are courses, the other side are faculty. So faculty, there is no relation, although there is a friendship graph which you can draw, but that is not of concern right now. So there are these equivalent characterizations of bipartite graphs. So for people who are seeing it for the first time, this may sound slightly new, but we will believe these are very easily provable, that given a graph is bipartite if and only if it does not have any cycle which is an odd cycle. So odd cycle is of length 3, 5. So any cycle which is of length 2k plus 1 for any k, if it does not have any such cycle, you can actually come up with, so if you are given this guarantee that you have a graph which is a relation between some vertices, so this drawing of this graph has no concern whether it is bipartite or not. I can actually draw all the vertices below this or the pink interleaved with the blues. But the important point is you should still be, or all the vertices are uncolored. Who tells you that this is a bipartite graph? The absence of an odd cycle tells us that this is a bipartite graph. And how do you detect whether there is an odd cycle or not? Again, you can use your simple BFS algorithm to actually find out whether there are odd cycles. But I'll leave this here. I'll just say that you can actually, given a graph in its adjacency list representation or adjacency matrix representation, you can run your simple BFS algorithm and do a small modification to make sure to answer the question whether G is bipartite or not. And if it is bipartite, also give me the two partitions. What are the vertices on one side, what are the vertices on the other side? This also can be fairly easily done. So for now, we will assume that somebody has done all this, given us a bipartite graph where the two partitions are also identified. That is A, we'll always call this as the A and B side, unless there is some other name that is more intuitive. And I think maybe you have thought of this problem of coloring. So given a graph, you may want to color or assign colors to vertices such that no two vertices which share an endpoint have the same color, right? So this is called the famous coloring problem, and it has emerged from the map coloring problem. That is, given a map in a plane, so let's say India's map, can you actually color, how many colors do you require? And there's a famous 4-color theorem that it is possible to color every map or every planar graph using just 4 colors. So are there graphs, or are there some relations, or are there some graphs that you can draw which require more than 2 colors? Can you think of some graphs? So I have shown this, in fact this is also a 2 coloring, because I have shown that the left hand side vertices are all colored with blue. Which colors I use is of inconsequential. So I can use black and white, you can use blue and yellow, that is not of importance. I am just using 2 colors, that is important. So I have already shown a coloring which is blue on the left, pink on the right, and once you know that you have a bipartite graph, yes, you can actually color it using 2 colors. But now I am asking, are there structures that, or are there graphs which you cannot color using 2 colors? So just having lot of vertices doesn't forbid you, right? As long as you have bipartite graphs, you can draw as many vertices as you like. But let's say you have this simple thing of 5 cycles, or even to make life simpler for us. Okay, so this 3 cycles. Let's try to color it using 2 colors. So let me say I give a red color here. I will be forced to use another color here, blue. Now as soon as I am trying to color this third vertex V3, I cannot use red, neither can I use blue. And I will have to use some other color which is yellow, or whichever. So this simple odd cycle which is of length 3 forces us to use 3 colors. And in fact you can show that the presence of an odd cycle immediately means that you cannot color it using 2 colors. Anywhere if there is an odd cycle of any length, even if it is a bigger cycle, you can play the same trick. You are going to have to use red here, you are going to have to use blue here, and at this place you are going to be stuck, you will have to use a new color. So the presence of the odd cycle forbids 2 color ability. Doesn't mean that if you do not have 3 cycles, there are other structures which may forbid you from using 2 colors. But certainly if you have no odd cycles in your graph, you can certainly color it using 2 colors, right? So is this clear? These are equivalent characterizations. That is, you can have an odd, if you do not have an odd cycle, it is guaranteed to be bipartite. If it is bipartite, it doesn't have an odd cycle. If it is 2 colorable, it is bipartite. So these are all equivalent ways to say that when is a graph bipartite. So we are going to deal with only such graphs now. We are going to talk about bipartite graphs. Again, a matching is a well-defined term. Here, we are just saying that which vertex on the A side is paired off with which vertex on the B side. Now we have this notion of A side of vertices and B side of vertices because there is a partition of the vertexes. So let's ask these questions. Again, the red edges form a matching here. So is this matching maximal? So recall what is maximal. You cannot add more edges to it without removing anything. So there is, if this matching has to be maximal, then you cannot add more edges to it without removing any edges. Can you add more edges to it which are, okay, what edges can you add? A1, B2 is certainly what you can add. Still is it, okay, so even after adding A1, B2 it is not maximal. You can still add A5, B5, right? So clearly you don't have a matching here which is even maximal, but you can easily add that by your greedy algorithm, which is a linear time algorithm. Scan the edges, ask can I add this edge to my current matching, and be done with it. Good. So now what are augmenting, are there augmenting paths with respect to this matching? Remember, this is what is the question that we are trying to attack. Given this graph and a matching, I want to design this black box. I want to go inside that black box and design an algorithm which gives me, which answers yes, there is an augmenting path, and gives me that path. Okay, so first of all, are there augmenting paths here? Okay, what are those paths? B1, A2. So you are talking about a longer path, B1, A2, B3, A4. Good. So that is an augmenting path. Okay, are there other paths? What about A1, B2 itself? So there are these one length augmenting paths which are staring at us. So A1, B2, A5, B5, clearly they are augmenting paths. So there can be multiple augmenting paths, and this is a list of some of them. So A1, B2, A5, B5, then A4, B3, A2, and is that correct? A2, B4. Yeah. So this is again a 3-length augmenting path. This is A4, B3, A2. The red edge is the match edge, and then we come to B4, which is again an augmenting path. Both the endpoints are free. And now, can we observe a little more about augmenting paths? Let's say my augmenting path starts on the A side. Where does it end? B side, right? Because as soon as you take a B, you go to the B side, you have traversed one edge which is odd number of things. So you can end in the B side with one edge. If you come back again, you have traversed even number of things. And remember, our augmenting paths are always going to be of odd length, right? So if you have an augmenting path, it starts at some free vertex on the A side and ends at a free vertex in the B side. It is symmetric, right? Our edges have no direction, so you can think about the path starting on one side, ending on the other side. Is that okay? Good. So now our goal is only to find these paths in no particular order. I mean, I'm not worried whether you give me that 3-length path or 1-length path. You should, if there is one path, you give me that path, is my question. So now, is there a way that you can convert? So you have studied several problems, right? You have studied possibly exploring graphs, you have studied shortest paths, you have studied spanning trees. So the goal in when we are looking at a new problem should be that is this problem mappable, or is this reducible to something which we have already studied? If we know that, okay, if I want to find augmenting paths in this graph, it is equivalent to finding some other path or some other structure in this new graph, then actually I have the algorithm written or the algorithm developed for that other problem. Just like if when we are studying multiplication for the first time, we only know how to do addition. So we know that, okay, if I have to do 10 into 5, I have to just add 10 5 times. I just know addition, then I can do multiplication. Similarly, if I know that finding augmenting paths is equivalent to finding some other paths in some other graph, then which is simpler, not because augmenting paths is something which we learned just now. There is no algorithm written for it. But maybe I want to ask, is it possible to reach S, to reach from this vertex to this vertex? This reachability question is a simpler question, but you cannot just ask reachability in this graph. You have to suitably modify your graph, right? So now we are going to say that finding augmenting paths is going to be only a reachability question, that is, can given a vertex S, some vertex S and some vertex T, can you reach from S to T in this suitably modified graph? If you can answer this question, then you will be able to find augmenting path. If I give you this guarantee, how will you do reachability? So let's say that I am just asking you that I will modify the graph for you, but now I am asking, given S, a source vertex, and a T, the graphs are unweighted. So I will not introduce any weight function. They will all be unit weight edges, or they do not have any weight. I'll ask, is S reachable from, or is T reachable from S? And I'll also possibly put directions. So you are aware of directed graphs, right? You can have directions. You can go from S to A1 but not from A1 to S. You can have such edges. So if I want to answer this reachability question, how can you answer it? Yes? Huh? Sorry? Source to destination. Direct edges will not be present from S to T, but maybe I will give you again this graph, right? So maybe I will not have any matching, no such matching edges are there, but I will have edges of this form, directed edges. And I will ask you this question, can you reach from V2 to V7? And clearly you can see V2, V6, V7 is a path. But maybe there are some, for example, if I draw the edges appropriately, there is no way to reach from V4 to V3. I can orient the edges in a particular way, right? But given this oriented graph or the directed graph and given a pair S and T, how do you answer, can I reach from S to T? Yes? Depth first search, breadth first search, any of these search techniques. Remember, search is just exploration. So you start with the given source that you have, and you have this directed graph. The breadth first search, depth first search both work on directed graphs as well, and the adjacency list take care of the out degrees. Then you actually ask, is this T in the same connected component that I have started exploring from S? And you can answer this question, right? So now what we are going to do is, we are going to take this graph, which is a bipartite graph with matchings or matched edges, and say that every augmenting path corresponds to some S and T, ST path in some other graph where I'll give directions. So now let's exercise our thought process and see. I will also tell you the following, that whatever is this bipartite graph, I am going to add 2 new vertices. Bipartitions of the original graph where the matching was given to us. I am going to add 2 dummy vertices, S and T. And you should make sure that as soon as you have an augmenting path that connects from, that will give you a simple path from S to T via that augmenting path. If you do not have any augmenting path, you should not be able to reach from S to T. Is this clear? So can you now draw edges? You will also have to draw edges, and also you will have to give directions, because otherwise you will always be able to reach from S to T, right? As soon as you connect this to this and this to this, you are going to be able to, and very indicatively I have drawn S and T on at the correct positions. So these are to help you to say that what kind of edges are you going to draw. So you are going to possibly connect from S to vertices in A. Let the augmenting part take care of itself. Remember, as soon as you have an augmenting path, it should have one endpoint in A, the other endpoint sitting in B, because it is an odd length path, right? So that path is taken care. Of course, we'll have to set up the directions appropriately, but as soon as that augmenting path is present, you know that you have one endpoint here and one endpoint here. We'll have to traverse it. So we would want that free vertices that are unmatched should have connections from S, right? So that we are able to reach from S to a free vertex. The augmenting path, we have to take care of it, how to connect it, but free vertices should also have possibility of connecting to T, right? So this is what we will try to do. We are actually given this graph. So are the edges visible from S? Okay, good. So we have introduced these dummy vertices S and T, and we have very cleverly done the following, that is, whenever there is an unmatched vertex on A side, you connect it from S, you draw an edge to that unmatched vertex. Whenever there is an unmatched vertex on the T side, you connect it, on the B side, you actually connect it to T, right? So this is what I have done. See, B3 was a vertex which is matched. I have not drawn the edge from B3 to T. In fact, you have a reverse edge. You can think of it that there is a reverse edge in that graph. But for now, just assume that you took the graph with and you had the matching, you now said that okay, I will actually connect from S every vertex that is unmatched on the A side. I will draw a directed edge from S to that vertex. Is this construction clear? Now you have to also ensure that the augmenting path actually goes in the correct direction, right? There is an augmenting path which did not have directions initially. Possibly this is the path. Since this is a free vertex, this has to be a free edge. Then there is this matched edge. There is a free edge. There is a matched edge. And there is a free edge. And that is why this was an augmenting path in your original graph with respect to the matching. Now you want to convert this into a directed path. So what directions do you want to give so that this actually becomes a directed path from S to T in this directed network, and you can forget about matched edges and so on. So can you give directions, of course keeping in mind that there are matched edges and unmatched edges, but the only directions that you need to give are from A to B or B to A, right? So is there any suggestion about what directions do we want to give? Okay, so this edge, which side do you want to go to? So remember, you want that this should actually traverse this way, right? So at least in this example, what directions do you want to give? All. So this matched edge, unmatched edge, you want to give from A to B. The unmatched edge, B to A. Again the matched edge from B to A. The unmatched edge again from A to B. This again from B to A, and this again from A to B. So now this suggests a pattern, right? Actually, you have to label all unmatched edges from A to B, label or direct all edges from unmatched edges from A to B, and all matched edges from B to A, in addition to the fact that you had introduced these dummy vertices and connected them to these unmatched vertices on the A side here, and unmatched vertices on the B side connect to T. If you had this, now it's a simple, I mean you have to observe this, but you take any augmenting path in the original graph, it will actually correspond to an ST path in this graph. Similarly, if you take any ST path in this graph, then you are actually going to get an augmenting path in your original graph, right? So if the network or these directions are given exactly according to the matching that we had initially. Is this construction clear? So given a graph and a matching in the graph, the way you are constructing this bigger directed network is you add two dummy vertices S and T. For every vertex which is unmatched on the A side, S has a connection to it. For every vertex on the B side which is unmatched, it connects to T. Matched vertices do not connect, and then you actually direct the vertices of the edges of the original graph in the following manner. Matched edges go from B to A, and unmatched edges go from A to B. Once you have this, you can easily show that every augmenting path in this the original graph corresponds to a simple directed path from S to T, right? Okay, so how do you set up the, let's check whether we understand it correctly. So initially, nobody gives me any matching, right? So I start with a blank slate. I actually start with a simple bipartite graph, and there are these edges. There is no matching. How do I construct this bigger network? You have to follow these steps, yes. Add S and T. And now how do I make the connection? Connect S to every vertex here. From here. Connect T to from every vertex in B connected to T. What about the directions on the edges? Since all edges are unmatched, they actually go from A to B, so all edges have this direction. And it is easy to see that all these edges actually are single length augmenting paths, which are actually 3 length ST paths in this, because for any path which is of length 2k plus 1, which is an augmenting path, you have added 2 more edges, which are the dummy edges which need to go from the first S to that vertex and from that vertex to T, right? So once you have this construction, the black box, the reachability black box is going to give you some augmenting path. It is certainly going to be a 1 length path in this graph, and then using that you repeatedly keep on augmenting. Every time somebody gives you a matching, you actually convert, you go to this graph, bigger graph, which is not too much bigger. It is only adding 2 more vertices and adding n1 many edges on this side, n2 many edges on the other side, if n1 and n2 are the cardinalities of A and B. So is this part clear? So now we have gone inside and designed the black box for bipartite matching. That is, given a graph, given a bipartite graph and a matching in the graph, you can answer this question, is there an augmenting path? If yes, return me that path. That is simply that ST path. That ST path, you will throw away the first and the last edge, and that internal path is going to be an augmenting path. And that is guaranteed to be a path which is of odd length, along which you can flip.
So we have some m choices. What is the first choice, or we can choose that?
You don't have to choose. Choose anything, right? So there is no need to make an intelligent choice. Choose any. So the reachability algorithm doesn't care about whether you want a short path, you want a long path. It is in fact going to give you any path that is an ST path. You choose any path. So you are going to choose. So you are very right that suppose I had this as my graph, and you made this. So he has a good question. He asks us that this is my original graph in which I wanted to find the matching. Clearly you see that there is a two-sized matching. But all the edges are oriented like this to begin with, and I can very well make this wrong choice and find out and get this augmenting path. What will you get in return? You will get this output, right? Now you subject your algorithm to the subject your graph and the matching. Can you not proceed further? Good, but now let us look at this in our old theory where you have this as a matching. Now are you stuck? You are going to give this to your black box and ask, is there an augmenting path? What will it answer? Why? Because now it is going to form a different graph. It is going to attach this, it is going to attach this to T, and now this edge is going to get directed like this, these edges, and this is the only ST path which is present, which it is going to return to you. And therefore you are going to correct yourself. Of course you could have done better possibly by choosing these two ST paths in the first step itself. That is a very valid question, but as of now the correctness is not violated. You can do 2 iterations. Yes, you will do more iterations than possibly required, but yes, you are not stuck where you could have proceeded, right? So you can make this mistake. Nevertheless, you will have an opportunity to correct it because you defined your augmenting path wisely. And that is the beauty of it. As soon as you do not have an augmenting path, you know that by Birch's theorem you can halt without thinking whether there will be still matchings of larger size. So as long as your black box returns some augmenting path, go ahead, do the XOR operation and flip edges along that augmenting path, get a larger matching. You may actually make mistakes again, you will still have a way to correct them, right? So you still can make mistakes, again correct them, but as soon as your black box or this algorithm now says that there is no augmenting path, you can happily stop and be sure that you have output a matching which is the largest size. But this is a very valid question, so everybody gets this algorithm that we already knew the basic framework. We now said that this internal give me augmenting path is this algorithm which is only a reachability question. And if people remember it from yesterday's class, in fact this is only what it is saying is you don't even have to do this reachability. You actually say that you can think about this as a flow network where S and T are the dummy vertices which are added. You want a max ST flow, but every edge is actually of capacity 1. So you can have, you remember that the edges are directed. Initially all the edges are directed from A to B, that is what is your network. You have S, these are unit capacity edges. The flow network of course asks you to give you capacities. And now you want to know that what is the maximum flow that can go from S to T. Of course these also have capacities, which are unit capacities. And this is a way to reduce, that is, suppose you have studied the flow problem, you want to do bipartite matching. In fact, you can just convert your bipartite matching problem into a flow problem and then just So I say that, okay, somebody else has written a flow solver for me. I will use that with a specialized graph where all capacities are unit capacities. And this reduction actually is one way to solve the problem. This is another equivalent way of stating the same thing. That is, you are talking about giving me augmenting paths in a by doing some reachability questions, right? So, and if you have seen the Ford-Fulkerson method, I'm sure you remember that it is very similar, that you keep on improving the flow, and there also you could have possibly had this situation where you chose this to put your flow, but in fact going along this is the best way because you could have sent. I'm sure you have seen this example where this edge has a very small capacity and you keep iterating, but then in this, because your capacities are all bounded, you know that you cannot go too many times, so we'll bound the number of iterations required for our algorithm. Okay, good. So now we had this iterative improvement algorithm, and we have now refined this and given what the exact details of our, while there exists an augmenting path, this line we have blown up by making that bigger reachability graph and asking these reachability questions. So to understand or to analyze the running time of this, what do we need to know, or how do we analyze the running time? So we need to know that have we blown up our graph too much? So remember that we are given a graph initially which had some n vertices, and so let me write them as n1 plus n2, n1 vertices on the A side, n2 vertices on the B side, and some m edges, which is going to be a function of n1 and n2. Now we are given this graph. I constructed the reachability graph G prime. How large is that graph? Let's write the number of vertices in that graph. Yeah, it is n plus 2, which is n1 plus n2 plus 2, because I am writing this like this. And how many edges are we drawing in that graph? Certainly we are retaining, we are giving directions, but that doesn't increase. So we certainly have all the m edges that we have, but we also have some extra edges. How many edges are there extra? m plus n1, that is why I wrote this as n1 plus n2, because we have n1 edges coming from this side, s to every vertex, and n2 edges. So this is precisely n1 plus n2, or n, which is the number of vertices in the original graph. So we haven't done too much of a blow up, right? So we still are in the same order, that is, we are still in order n, which is equal to n1 plus n2, and we are still in order m, assuming that m is sufficiently large. M is at, so assuming that the graph is connected, in which case m is greater than or equal to n1 plus n2, we still are in the same order. That is, we have a graph which is order n and order m. So now we are happy, that is, we haven't done too much of a blow up of our graph in which we are doing reachability. But now, how many times, so this initialize m to be empty is a constant time operation. So now this while there exists an augmenting path, so how many iterations do we do, and how long does each iteration take? This is the question we need to answer. So how long does each iteration take? So of course, this while there exists an augmenting path itself is a question, because you are going to form this reachability graph, ask a reachability question, and then answer it, and then do this XOR. So these are the 3 steps that you will do. So forming this graph is certainly a linear time operation. You will do it in order m plus n time if m and n were your original parameters. How long does this reachability take? We said we'll use BFS or DFS. So how long does it take? Again, it takes linear time in the size of the graph, so you haven't done extra work. So each iteration takes order m plus n time, right? That is, each iteration takes linear time, because you form the reachability graph, you ask a reachability question, and then once you get the path can only be of size n, because there can be at most all the vertices in your graph, but then you flip along that, you will only do order n work. So the total time is dominated by the forming and the reachability, which is order m plus n. And then how many iterations? So one iteration takes linear time. How many iterations do you do? suppose in one iteration you get an augmenting path, right? So you know that you have matched 2 vertices. In the next iteration, you may actually only do 2, right? So then you keep on doing this. How many iterations do you need to know that? So what can be the size of the largest matching? N by 2, right? Because if you have n vertices, the number of edges in your matching is at most n by 2. And therefore you cannot go beyond the size of the matching. At that, when you have found the largest size matching, you are augmenting, the reachability question is going to give you a no. Therefore, in fact, you will do n by 2 iterations or order n iterations of this. So it's hiding a constant, but it's in fact less than or equal to n by 2 iterations of this algorithm. And each iteration takes order m plus n time. Therefore, you have indeed achieved what is an mn algorithm for this problem. That is m times n, where m and n were your just original parameters. N is n1 plus m2, m is the number of edges in the graph. Of course, you have constants hiding there where you will have 2 times or something, but we'll live with that. We'll live with the order notation and say that yes, we have an order mn algorithm for computing a maximum cardinality matching in a bipartite graph. Is this fine? Any questions on this part? So, this is not the best possible, in fact, and this comes from your observation which says that, in fact, when you had this, this was your graph in which you wanted to find a maximum matching, the best thing would be to actually augment along both these paths. If you were able to do this, so you are already spending your time looking at the whole graph, you have spent order m plus n time. Can you actually identify multiple vertex disjoint paths along which you can simultaneously augment, because all of these are non-interfering with each other. So if somebody told you that, okay, there are these 2 paths that I will give you and augment simultaneously along with this, then you are done in one iteration. And this is what is the idea of Hopcroft and Karp, which will let you do that instead of augmenting along any path that we did, which was a naive algorithm, which is correct, but you want to do along shortest augmenting path in that ST network. And with some more analysis, you can show that you can stop in root and iteration. Again, this is fairly straightforward, or not fairly okay to show it in a bipartite graph, but requires a lot of work to do in case of the general graph, where even this black box that we have blown up with reachability is not a correct thing, because it will not necessarily find all augmenting paths with the technique that we have developed. So in general graphs, our technique doesn't work, but there are techniques which are developed which will give us the same running time, which is m root n. And it requires, so this is a famous paper by Edmonds, which is the Edmonds Blossom. So this is not the title of the paper. The paper is also called, actually Paths, Flowers and something. So it's a very classical paper, and it is also credited with this thing of the first time he actually formalized the notion of polynomial time being a measure of efficiency. So this 1960 something paper, and where he gave a very beautiful blossom shrinking algorithm for finding maximum cardinality matchings on general graphs. So general graphs are graphs in which you will also allow odd cycles, the graphs which we saw in the first part. But remember that Bird's theorem, the theory of augmenting paths, still holds as it is for general graphs, but our technique of finding augmenting paths is not going to work for general graphs. And in fact, one can ask questions that if I am not interested only in sizes, but let's say that there were weights. So let's say that this edge weight is 100. If I match this job to this machine, then I get a profit of 100. On the other hand, here I get some small profit. Then although the cardinality of this is good, that is you get size which is 2, but I get a profit of 4, and it is very natural that you are interested in computing matchings which have large size or small size, depending on whether it is profit versus penalty. You can in fact do this using linear programming techniques. You have to formulate this as a linear program. So you have also studied about LPs and all, right? So you can use those tools to actually come up with matchings which have small or large weight, as the case may be, right? So Again, there is lot of theory that can be told about this, or but we'll just go back to where we started. So now, remember our question we started in the or in the early afternoon. We asked, can this chessboard be tiled where you have these two corners removed? So let's first ask, can we even formulate this question as a matching problem? Is there any relation why we spoke about this when we wanted to talk about matching? Okay, so now you have to tell, it's good, this is on the right line, but you have to tell me that what are your vertices, when will you draw edges between vertices? Okay, if it is adjacent. So let me say that, let's say that all the vertices are labeled with their row number and column. So the cells are labeled with their row number and column number. There is 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, and 2, 1, 2, 2. So let me write this arbitrary cell number ij. So of course I and j range between 1 and 8. So there is an ij cell number which is somewhere sitting in that chessboard. So to what all will it have its adjacency? I plus 1j. So I plus 1j is actually, so you are incrementing the row number, so it is I plus 1j, okay. I j plus 1.
I minus 1 j.
I minus 1j. So
I j minus 1.
I minus 1j and I, yeah, so it is I minus 1 comma j, right? Is that correct? So what about the diagonal things?
I comma j.
Okay, so did I make a mistake? Okay, I comma j minus 1. Good. Okay. Yeah, so these are the four things. So what about these diagonals? Will you call them adjacent?
No.
Cannot?
Connected
with the two. Good. So now why did you define this adjacency? Because I gave you a domino which actually fits only horizontally or vertically. If I had given you something which actually fits diagonally, maybe you would have defined an adjacency which is different. So good. So at least we are at a place where we have defined a graph. So we indeed have defined this graph, which is this. So I didn't write that ij, but we have this diagram where you actually defined the adjacency. But now where is the matching problem? So now how many vertices do we have in our graph? Let's ask that question. Once we have a chessboard, we have 64 cells, but out of that 2 have been removed, which is 62 cells. So we have 62 cells which are the vertices, we have adjacencies between them. Now, can we say anything about this? What is a matching now? Is there a matching problem? So whenever a domino is put on two cells, you can think about those two cells being matched to each other, right? And therefore, you can think about whenever you have this big graph that you have drawn on 62 cells something, then you can actually say that you are matching this to this, this to this. And when I say that you want to completely tile it, what do you mean? You actually want to find a matching which matches all the vertices, doesn't leave anything unmatched, and doesn't actually fall down beyond your chessboard, right? So which means that you want to compute a matching in this graph which actually matches every vertex, which is also known as a perfect matching, right? But now is the observation that we can very nicely make with all this, that you can see that as soon as you drew this, let's say whatever is this ij, if it was a red cell, then all these neighboring cells happen to be yellow cells. On the other hand, if this is a yellow cell, then all these neighboring cells happen to be red cells. And therefore, you know that you have a bipartite graph. You will always draw edges between red cells to yellow cells or yellow cells to red cells, but never edges between red and red, because red and red are diagonally connected or they are disparate. I mean, they are just too far away from each other where you cannot fit a domino. Therefore, you have a bipartite graph in which you have 30 yellow cells because you have removed 2 cells of this 2 cells which are yellow, and this will always happen whatever color you give, because both these diagonal things are going to get the same color. So this color is only for our perception. There's nothing to do with, so you can ask this question with without any coloring or without it being a chessboard, the answer will still be a no. But the coloring helps us reason about it. And you see that on the left side you have 32 cells. And there is no way that you are going to be able to match 32 cells on the left side to 30 cells on the right side. Therefore, you can even claim that this graph which you have drawn when two cells have been removed will never have a perfect matching which matches everybody. You can certainly have a matching which matches all of this, but you will be left with two red cells which are unmatched. And therefore, now you have given a proof that in fact this graph does not have a perfect matching, and therefore the original problem where you wanted to tile the dominoes in fact cannot be done if you had two cells which are removed which are of the corners. You can go back and ask what happens if I remove any two yellow cells or any two red cells anywhere. Can I still tile it? Can I still not tile it? And so on. So there are a lot of these interesting puzzles. Not all of them can be solved using matching, but there is a full area of chessboard puzzles. Without knowing anything about, almost anything about chess, you can look at these puzzles which are interesting in themselves. Okay, so with this we are now going to talk about another problem, and we are possibly going to try to connect the first two problems which we talked about, the project allocation and the joint seat allocation of seats or the engineering seats to various students. And we are going to talk about this again a very classical problem called the stable marriage problem. So again, this problem has been introduced formally in 1962 by two eminent researchers, David Gale and Lloyd Shapley, and they studied this in the context of something what they called as college admissions, which we again saw what we said as joint seat allocation. They also were faced with this same problem. Of course, the problem they were looking at was in the American setting, and in fact, even prior to that, it was this problem had come up in this national residency matching program. That is, in the US, when medical students have to intern, they have to apply to various hospitals. On the other hand, hospitals will have some ranking depending on whether they want to have interns in this department, in some specialization and so on. And therefore, they will have this. And if you had this decentralized mechanism, that is, every hospital just looks at its own applicants, makes offers, then there were a lot of vacancies which were remaining, and lot of people, medical residents who were remaining unhappy, or they were not even getting assigned to hospitals when there were vacancies. So this, because everybody makes offers to the topmost people who are available, and then of course the person can only take up a seat at one place for this internship. So this made people think that is there a centralized mechanism where everybody submits their choices, and then the centralized mechanism makes a decision which resident gets which hospital, or similarly when we talk about joint seat allocation, which student gets which seat and so on. But at the end of it, what would you want to guarantee to students, or what would you like this assignment or this allocation to satisfy? So let's talk about only this college admission. So let me say that there are some seats vacant in, let's talk about two colleges, that is, say IIT Madras and SSN College. There are some 50 computer science seats in both of them, and there are some 200 students who are applying. So there are just 100 seats, there are 200 students who are applying. Let me say that so let's assume so that we are in the same context, SSN College ranks it according to its own test, and IIT Madras ranks it according to its own test. So now at the end of this allocation, you give me some allotment. That is, you tell me that okay, these 50 students go here, these 50 students go here. What is it that, when will students be unhappy? Or when will students have no way to crib about the allotment? Is the setting clear? I have just, so let me call it some college, so SSN College, which has 50 seats. There is only one course that is being offered. There is IITM, which has just 50 seats. There are 200 applicants or students who are wanting to go for these seats. But of course, there is no single ordering because SSN has its own test, IIT Madras has its own test, and I cannot come up with a single ordering, right? But let me say that there is a student who has been rejected from both, right? Of course, there are 200 students. There has to be a student who is rejected from both. Let that person be Rohan. And now, what will Rohan ask? He will ask SSN college and look at, give me the top 50 students that you admitted, right? It should not be the case that anybody is ranked lower than me. If there is somebody who is ranked lower than me by the SSN listing criteria, he is going to make a big ruckus because he will say that why did you favor him when you had given this kind of a ranking criteria? Similarly, all 50 students who have been admitted into IIT Madras are actually favored, better favored or better ranked in the IIT Madras ranking list than this Rohan. If this is true, then yes, he'll be disappointed, but he cannot do anything because indeed everything has been done in a fair manner. Is this clear? Similarly, let me say that a person has gone into IIT Madras, so of course he has only two choices. But suppose he wanted to go into SSN, then he will say that he will be unhappy only if all the 50 people who are put into SSN are ranked better than him with respect to the SSN criteria. Only then he will be disappointed because he did not get his first choice, he got his second choice, but then he certainly cannot make any issue about it because things were done in a fair manner. So this is what is called the criteria of stability, and this is what we want to ensure in allocations, because once you have stability in allocations, people are not going to look at their assigned courses or assigned things and go against the centrally assigned things, because if you find that, yes, you find a pair where SSN college also has somebody who has been given a lower rank person and Rohan in fact wants to move to SSN, Rohan will say, yes, I will also pay the fee, you ditch that student who is lower ranked than me in your ranking list. And both of them are going to be happier than what they were with the centralized allocation. So such a thing causes instability because the central authority has given you some assignment or allotment which people have incentive to go against. And such an unstable condition is what we would want to avoid. And there is where this term stable marriage or stable matchings come in. And the reason to call this as a marriage was because it was studied or it was at least exposed in the classical setting of in the classical paper where they introduce it. It is introduced in the notion of between n men and n women. So you have n men on one side, there are n women. You want to marry them off, but not only marry them off in an arbitrary manner, but that they also have some preferences. So they also say that, okay, man 1 likes to be matched to man 2, women 2, women 3 and so on. So therefore, this is a very natural bipartite setting where you have men on one side, you have women on the other side, and there is no concept of edges being not present. So in fact, you will say that this man has all the edges possible to all the women here. So he indeed is okay to be matched with any woman. So this is a classical setting. You actually, this setting seems very unrealistic, but all this theory can be generalized when you have unequal number of men and women or unequal number of participants. You have only a subset of edges present and you have ties in preferences. All this theory can be generalized, but we will expose it only in the very strict setting of every man ranking every woman, right? So what I have shown here is a setting where there are just 3 men and 3 women, and what these lists read out is man 1 says that he likes W1, the first choice, so that every man has a choice or a preference list. So man 1 says that he likes W1 as his first choice, W2 as his second choice, and W3 as his third choice. But this need not have any bearing on what man 2 likes. Man 2 may have a completely different preference list. Just like you can think of two different students having two different preferences over the same set of colleges or courses. And in the similar manner, the courses or the colleges also have a completely different ranking criteria. So each woman also has her own list of the men. So these lists are what are given to us. So the bipartite graph here is implicit because we have a n cross n bipartite graph where all edges are present, and in addition we have the edge sets ranked from two sides. So every edge has two endpoints. Both the endpoints have some ranking function. This side says that the man likes this as its which preference and so on. So these are the two additional things that we are given to us. And we want to compute a matching which is optimal. So we want to avoid this bad situation of unstable pairs being present or instability being present in the matching. So let's first ask this question. Stare at this matching and ask, is this a good matching? So how will you answer this question, is this a good matching? Of course, it has size 3. So everybody who wanted to be paired off is paired off. So in terms of cardinality, this is the maximum that you can do. And there is no question of cardinality because in fact you can find perfect matchings which or maximum matchings which are of size 3 or size n. So how will you try to answer whether this is a good matching or not? Okay, many of them have been. Okay, but that you possibly cannot avoid, right? So many of them have been given their last preferences is something you need not be able to avoid, because if you have something which is top favored by, so okay, then give me a good matching. M2 and W2. Okay, so so remember what we called as an unstable situation. So whenever somebody is not assigned to another person, so let's look at this M2 and W2. Clearly they are not assigned to each other in this matching or this assignment. Let us ask, would M2 want to move away from his current partner, which is W3? So let's look at M2's preference list. Certainly it prefers W2 better than his current partner W3. Similarly, let's look at W2 and ask, both of them should be willing. Otherwise, if only one of them is willing, we are not going to break that. Both of them are not going to break their current partnership. So W2, let's ask, are you unhappy with your current partnership when you compare it with M2? And he is also unhappy. She is also unhappy because she is matched to M3, which she ranks worse than M2. And if they happen to come together, they will see that yes, they are indeed not matched to each other, and there are not matched to each other when they like each other better than their current partners. They will in fact break their current partnerships, and in fact the term that is used is they will elope, and therefore this will create an unstable situation. So but you can think about this in a very practical scenario where if such course allotments are done, M2, W2 are going to be very unhappy because M2 has lost a good course that he or she wanted, whereas the course has lost a good student who was interested in doing that course. So both the university as well as the student are going to go to the court saying that, okay, this is not what I wanted to, what you should have done, when there is an assignment which is possible, which is stable. So indeed, this M2W2 pair is bad or which is unstable for this matching. But in fact, if you look at M3W3, which is also not an assigned pair, let's ask, is this also a bad pair? M3W3. So M3 from his side, yes, certainly he would like to move because W3 is the first choice for him. But let's ask W3. Yeah. So does it want to move? So is it an unstable pair? Yes. So there are indeed more than one unstable pairs, but showing that there is one unstable pair is good enough that this matching is not a stable matching. So first, before even we ask how do you compute stable matching, we should first ask, given a matching, how do you identify whether it is unstable or not? And how would you do that? So I have given you the preference list of men and women. I have given you a matching, which is an assignment, and I ask you, how do you find out whether this matching is stable or not? Yeah? Hmm. So you don't have to take a pair which is assigned? Huh. Okay. Okay, so you don't even have to say a new connection is given. Take a pair which is unassigned. So all these pairs, which is M1W2, M1W3, M2W1, M2W2, are all candidates for becoming unstable pair. Take every such unassigned pair, which is actually going to be n squared, order n squared minus n, because you have assigned n pairs. You are not going to look at the assigned people. Take every unassigned pair and ask, would you both want to switch with respect to this assignment? If the answer is yes, and if you find even one such pair, you can easily declare that this matching is unstable. So doing this just takes n squared time. Of course, you have to set up the correct data structure so that you can answer this question in constant time, that given a pair which is unmatched, do they both want to flip? So this deciding whether this matching is stable or not is very easily possible in order n squared time. So in fact, you can, so this is one stable matching, and in fact it satisfies your criteria also, that everybody is given his, every man is given his first choice. But if you look at women, right, so if you look at W1, in fact she is given her worst preferred partner, and now even if you look at this from the W side, you can find out that none of the man-woman pair who are not assigned are able to create unstable situations, because either the man or the woman or both actually are happy with the current assignment. So none of the pairs which are unassigned can create an unstable situation is what we want. So more formally, a pair MW that is not matched to each other. So give again an unstable pair, just like an augmenting path is described with respect to a matching. Similarly, an unstable pair is with respect to a given assignment. Of course, unstability, I mean, to define about stability itself, you require preference list. But given an instance and a matching in this, you will say that some pair is unstable if both of them are not matched to each other and they both prefer their current partners, they both prefer each other to their current partners. So if this situation you can show even for one pair that is unassigned in the matching, you will say that the matching is unstable, right? And our goal is that given these preferences, give me a matching that is stable for this instance, right? How do you go about it, or what are the thoughts that you have when you are given this question? So you are given a graph, which is a bipartite graph. You are given the preference list in some particular format. You can assume that everybody has an array telling you what are the numbers for each woman that can be conveniently represented. You are asked, give me a matching which is stable. What is the first question that comes to your mind? Okay, so what maybe if you, yeah, how do you compute stable matching? Okay. Okay, so one thing is good. So he says that let's look at all combinations. First of all, there are n factorial combinations, right? Because you know that there are exponentially many ways to match these people when you have a complete bipartite graph. So this first person has n choices. subject to that the second person has n minus 1 choices and so on. So there are n, so if you have both the sides having the same number of men and women, you have n factorial number of matchings in this. You can of course go and for each of these spend n squared time, because once you are given a matching, you can answer this question, is this matching stable or not? But even before this, what makes you think that given such instances of stable matching, it's such a peculiar criteria that one is asking for. Is the existence guaranteed? I mean, maybe there are some preference lists that you can set up such that there are no stable matchings with respect to this. If you try to satisfy a pair, some other pair starts making noise, right? So it could be, I mean, theoretically one should not discard this idea unless you have a proof that yes, all possible setups of the preference list do indeed admit a stable matching, right? So yes, you can go over all the exponentially many this thing, and maybe you will get an answer no. So this is one. So the first thing that, and again as computer scientists, maybe this doesn't come to our mind, but mathematicians routinely ask this question of existence. So given when we say that let x be such a value, okay, they will ask, is x guaranteed to exist? So are stable matchings guaranteed to exist is the first question that one should ponder on. And then, okay, then one can ask, is this stable matching unique? Can there exist multiple stable matchings? And then, can it be computed efficiently? Of course, we are, as computer scientists, we are interested in finding out algorithms which will give us stable matchings, provided they are guaranteed to exist. Or at least tell that this instance does not admit any stable matching. Is also one way to come out of this, that there is no stable matching. Okay, but let me say that the first question magically has the answer yes. So this was again proved by Gale and Shapley in their seminal paper, where they showed that any instance of the stable marriage problem does admit at least one stable matching. In fact, there can be multiple stable matching. But now how do you compute this? So any ideas about, so one way is yes, you go over this exponentially many matching. This is correct, but it is inefficient, right? Yeah. So any other suggestions about how do you compute stable matching? So let's go back to what we had here, right? So let's look at this, stare at this first unstable matching. Maybe we try to pair up people arbitrarily. We don't know how to do that. So we try to give everybody their first choice, right, as long as it is possible. So take a man, pair it off with the first woman that is possible. You can only keep doing this for some time, because soon there will be some men who have the same woman as their first choice, who was already taken by somebody. So now maybe give them their second choice or keep doing this. So you come up with an arbitrary assignment. But let's observe something. So let's say that some man is matched or paired off with a woman who is the top choice woman, right? Can he ever participate in an unstable pair? So remember that there is a man M whom we have, by some method we have assigned this M1 to W1, and M1 rates W1 as his first choice. This may be anything. This may be actually 10 or something. We don't know. But let's now ask. Now there is some unmatched W5 or something, or this unmatched pair is there, M1 W5. Can M1 participate in the unstable pair? Never, because M1 will always like to be matched to W1 whenever he is compared with any other woman. W5 may be willing to participate in an unstable pair, but all these M's we have saved. So whoever we assigned the first woman in their preference list, we are certainly guaranteed that we are not forming unstable pairs with respect to them. So what we want to say is, if we can show that all men that we have will never participate in unstable pairs, this will ensure that women are also not participating, or there is no unstable pair, right? We want that both of them. So this gives us some ideas that we may want to do. So let's say that this is one method, that try to give greedily men as long as possible their first choice woman. If it is not possible, then go to their second choice, but make sure that they do not form an unstable pair with their first choice. So something of this sort, right? But I mean, yeah, you can try out, and there are certainly some techniques which we know and which we can create concrete counter examples where you can go into infinite loops with such algorithms. But there is a very again non-intuitive but an algorithm which works, and in the interest of time I will just have time to present the algorithm. So we may not be able to derive it the way we would have liked to do it in the class, but the algorithm is very or what naturally happens. So let's say that we begin with all the people in our setup as unmatched or or not engaged to anybody, and let's say that the men's side, so this is called the proposals algorithm or the deferred acceptance algorithm. So what does every man do? He goes and proposes to the most preferred woman he has not yet proposed. So let's say that every man is keeping a counter saying that till now I have proposed to this woman, and if that woman sometime rejects me, I am going to go only ahead. I am not going to propose women which I have already proposed. Something which possibly, I don't know whether it happens in real life or not, but let's say this is the algorithm that we are going to follow. So let's say that you actually, some man proposed to some woman. When will she reject him? So if she is free or she is unengaged, she is going to certainly accept him. But if she rejects him, what do we know? She already has a partner whom she prefers better than the current proposer, right? But now it could also happen, remember we are going from the men's side, it could happen that currently the woman got a proposal from some man and she accepted that proposal, but then later on she got a proposal from a person whom she prefers better, in which case she is going to reject her current partner and she is going to accept the current proposal which is better for her in her preference list, right? So the algorithm is clear. That is, as long as there are unengaged men, so only the men are the proposers, and there is no reason to work with this model where the men propose. It is symmetrically applicable to when women propose, but there are very strong properties of what output we get when one side proposes. Okay, so when you write such an algorithm where repeatedly things are changing, that is, remember when our matching algorithm was there, the greedy matching algorithm, we never removed edges. So we never had the problem that we are always increasing in size. On the other hand, the augmenting paths algorithm, we possibly could have removed things, but we still were increasing in size. But here, remember that some men who were engaged can become unengaged during the course of the algorithm. So we should first ask, does this algorithm stop? Why? When everyone is okay, but why can't it happen that people keep on looping? So remember that there is, you make proposals, some woman rejects you, you again become unengaged. It is not that the set of engaged men keeps on increasing. You start with all men being unengaged and all women being unengaged, but remember that a man can multiply become unengaged, but he will go on further. He will never propose the same woman again. Therefore, he will actually go ahead, and at least at the last woman, he is ensured that he will get matched, because the last woman cannot reject all of the partners that he have been proposing to her. So therefore, and you should see that you only can make proposals up to the end of your preference list. So therefore, every man makes at most n proposals. Therefore, there are total n squared proposals which will happen during the course of the algorithm, which means that in n squared iterations, this algorithm is going to halt. Is this clear? So you cannot go on in rounds because you have ensured that your proposal sequence never goes backward. So it maintains a current counter. It actually keeps on going further. If you get rejected by the woman that you are currently engaged to, you actually go forward in your preference list. So let us now try to ask, what were we interested in? Of course, we presented an algorithm. What were we interested in computing? stable matchings. So now this algorithm never has said anything about stability. So we want to ask, it produces a matching. Now does it produce a stable matching? Okay, why does it produce a stable matching? Okay, so yeah, maybe you have the intuition, but you will have to formalize it. So you want to say that at the end of the algorithm, you produce something which is stable. And by saying that something is stable, we want to ensure that no unmatched pair creates instability, right? So let me say that this algorithm paired off people in this peculiar way, and I want to show that this pairing is stable. So let me take a pair, let's call it MW pair, which is an unmatched pair. I don't know which pair it is, but it certainly is an unmatched pair. Let's ask, if this unmatched pair was there, it certainly is a candidate for becoming an unstable pair. Can it be an unstable pair? So let's say that we want this will become an unstable pair if, yeah, so when will it become an unstable pair? When M prefers W more than W prime, as well as W prefers M more than M prime, is when it will become an unstable pair. But now let's ask, what did M do when it went ahead and proposed? Our algorithm followed this proposal sequence. So we know that M has this preference list which looks something like this. W lies before W prime. There may be any number of women in between, but W lies before W prime because of the fact that this is an unstable pair. Therefore, during the proposals algorithm, what do you know? It must have proposed W before it went and proposed W prime. And we do not know what was the partner of W at that time, because that may itself have changed dynamically. But what we know from the algorithm is that the partner of every woman during the iterations of the algorithm only keeps on improving, because she only rejects people for better and better partners. So if she rejected W for some partner which is some M double prime was certainly rated better than what, and in fact she will get even better partners, so M prime is certainly rated. So if this situation happens, then it must be the case that W was matched to somebody better than M in W's preference list. And therefore, such an unstable pair is never created during or is never left at the end of this algorithm. Is this fine? So in fact, there is more that one can show that, so one crucial question is, we said that while there exists an unengaged man, so we did not even, just like the matchings algorithm, give me any path that is reachable from S to T. We did not even say which man do we pick up, right? So any man that is unengaged will go ahead and propose to the most preferred woman he has not yet proposed in his preference list. And this is some amount of non-determinism, that is, you are not telling which man to pick up, and therefore there can be several orderings. So although this algorithm is given, this doesn't seem to be a recipe, because if I follow it, I will follow it in a different way, you follow it in a different way. So then will our outputs be different? And of course they will be stable because of the way we have outputs. But again, it is a very remarkable result that whatever order you do this algorithm, or whatever order you choose of these men, you get the same output. So you can try this out for several examples, and you will really, it is really amazing that this non-determinism is of no consequence to this algorithm. In fact, the instance can admit many stable matchings, and in this matching that is produced by the men proposing algorithm, the men get their best deal. That is, amongst all stable matchings, this is the best deal that men can get, and therefore this is called the man optimal stable matching that is produced. Right? So how long do I have? Okay. Yeah, so I don't think, there are many proofs that one can do, but I'll just wind it up here. So what I want to say is that this itself, that it produces a stable matching, and it produces something which is called as man optimal stable, and the order of the proposal sequence has no consequence on the output of the algorithm, is something that one has to work out on several examples and appreciate the beauty of it. But one can certainly ask, why did you choose the men proposing algorithm? There is an equivalent women proposing thing, because things are just symmetric and we live in an equal world. So, so what happens if you ran the women proposing algorithm here? So remember, the proposals algorithm will remain the same. Each woman is going to propose to the most preferred man she has not yet proposed in her preference list, and the man is now going to accept or reject depending on what proposals he has. So what matching do you get? Do you get the same matching? No, right? You get a different matching, and in fact these are two different stable matchings. Again, the same result, why it is stable, is applicable, but you get two different matchings, and in fact the instance can have indeed multiple stable matchings, and you do have a way to find out the different stable matchings of the instance, but a single instance can admit more than one stable matching. So how does this connect to our questions that we asked earlier? So so when we talk about this joint seat allocation, in fact the students are on the sides of the men, or are going to be representatives of the men. The courses are going to be for the women, and then you actually go ahead that every student is going to apply to a course. The course, depending on how he or she is ranked, depending on his list. It has nothing to do with one global list that we are very much tied to usually, but there is his or her own list. The course is going to reject as long as the course is going to accept as long as it has vacancies. As soon as it is filled up, if that person happens to be of better caliber or better rank than the last person who he has admitted, he is going to replace that or reject this person itself, right? So this stable marriage algorithm is very much at the core of what happens in the National Residency Matching Program, then the Canadian hospitals, this thing, as well as closer to home, the joint seat allocation, which happened starting from last year, where 12th standard students had this nice experience of both NITs and IITs coming up together for the counseling, right? And there has been lot of work on this stable marriage problem, lot of variants that have been studied, and very practical variants where you actually have preference lists which are not complete, because it is unnatural that every student is going to rate all courses. You also have these natural preference list variations where you want two courses at the same position. You actually are indifferent between IIT Kanpur's computer science versus IIT Madras computer science. Then you rank them both at some rank 3. And then you would want to have your preference list to be, or your algorithm to be able to take care of such things. So there are several variants of this which have been studied and which have very nice algorithms. So again, very strong structural results are known, which are very beautiful by themselves, but which are also very much applicable in real life. So this is at a very nice junction where beautiful theory as well as very nice practical applications are there for such a problem. So, and in fact in 2012, Roth and Shapley won the Nobel Prize for their work on economic aspects of the stable marriage problem. So this is indeed one more reason why people should feel interested and excited about this. So yeah, so that is all that I had to say. If there are questions, I'll be happy to take them up. I hope I didn't miss anything. Okay, so this is basically the summary. Yeah, very good. So exactly. So when we did this, when we are doing this for student course allocation, we would want student optimality. That is, we want students to get their best courses. Of course, we want courses also to get their best students, but certainly we want students to be satisfied and be get. So although there are several stable matchings possible, the student applying algorithm was the one which was chosen. Yes. Based on the problem, you would want to choose which side applies. Yes.
Incomplete, right?
Yes, you can have students wish list which is incomplete.
So how do you approach the problem? What we have seen is the men are having the complete list of.
And women also are having the complete list. But what we saw is in fact something which is everybody, we did not even think about courses having capacities, right? In the real world, you're not going to talk about CSE offering one course, it is actually 50 students. So you will be able to take care of that, and you will go only up to your limited preference list. So you will have a preference list which is a subset of all the courses that are being offered, and the course keeps accepting as long as it has a vacancy.
Is having no preferences available, he will not be given.
He will not be given anything. So it is. That is why it is in the interest of the students to give lot of preferences, and also something which is realistic in terms of what they can get. Right. Of course, lot of last year cutoffs and everything is available. So students look at them and give long preference lists, so that in fact what was done in the joint seat counseling was some mock allocations were given. If people did not get something, they actually extended their preferences so that they got something in the next or in the actual round. So some mocks were shown to them, and yeah. So this very much. So this is an impractical situation where complete preferences are given, but very practical variations of them also yield the same result. That is, you can apply the same algorithm. Yeah, we can have questions offline as well. We'll be happy to answer.
On behalf of all the participants, we thank Aina for having spent one afternoon with us, complete afternoon. Last time she came to us just 1.5 hours. This time she was able to spend more time with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.